Hassan,
Hey.
this better be good.
This is gonna put you on the front page of the world, Miss Daisy.
Oh.
Hey, where you been? She's gonna be here soon. I changed my mind. We can stop this now or I'm dead, you understand? Hey, easy. Just give it to me.
Oh my God.
That's a little teaser from the new crime drama Shoot the Messenger. It premieres on CBC TV next Monday. And what follows from that shooting is a troubling mystery that takes the reporter from the street to the highest levels of power. Sudz Sutherland and Jennifer Holness created Shoot the Messenger, and they join me now in Studio Q. So Sudz, give us the elevator pitch for Shoot the Messenger. What story were you out to tell?
Hey, Candy, thanks for having us. This story is about a young reporter who witnesses a murder and is caught up at the center of the story. At first, she thinks it's like a gang-related thing, thinks it's a drug-related thing, and then instead it actually is a twisty-turny Byzantine-like path that takes her to again, as you said, the highest corridors of power, and shows that, sometimes you got like some people who are like kind of, on the quote unquote underclass mixing with the hoi polloi. And that was something that was, very intriguing to us.
And it's something that people want to ignore ever happens usually.
Absolutely.
Jennifer, political crime thrillers, they're a very popular TV genre. That's great, but it also means you have all kinds of competition. How did you go about making your show stand out?
Well, I mean, I think that we first of all watched a lot of crime drama, and we really thought about what were the elements that was really intriguing to us, but we also wanted to do something really authentic. And so when we were conceiving the show, we knew we wanted to work in the world of cops and journalism and sort of that conflicting relationship and really make that sexy. But at the same time, what was unfolding in front of us was sort of this Rob Ford story. And, and everyone in the world was listening to it and listening and seeing what was going on. And we didn't want to do the Rob Ford story, but we actually thought there were so much salacious elements about that story. The fact that it delved, for example, into the Somalian community, because it was these Somalian young men, for example, who was involved in the whole, what was on the phone and that kind of a thing. And so looking at those elements, we really took what we thought were some of the most interesting things around that and crafted our own drama. And we thought if the world stage was, interested in this story, then, we can certainly do our own version of it and make it, even more sexy.
So true. What do you think, Sudz, that political crime drama, what kind of insight does that give us into our society?
Well, I think that in looking like this particular show, ask the questions are, what is private and what is public? What's okay, what's fair? I mean, in the interest of, we're living in a post-internet age and the idea of privacy, a conversation that you and I have on the street, if somebody tapes it, we could be saying some like racist crap, but it's just between the two of us, but if somebody hears it, that could be the end of our careers.
So true.
And so we're looking at that notion, because the idea of public shaming, any one of us are like one tweet or email or recorded conversation away from being fired and being infamous for the rest of our lives, because that will be how we get defined on the internet for eternity.
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do is sort of mark that spot in time. And again, like take these characters who are, coming, and they're all flawed and they're all interesting and they're all sexy. And because, personally, that's for me, that's Canada for me. Like, I'm surrounded by flawed, sexy people. I am a flawed, sexy person.
Yeah, it's true. We all are.
I can agree to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
and I think that's so great and interesting. And all the bumpy, rough edges of things are really interesting to us. And I think those are the things that, for me as a viewer, I like. And for me as a reader and a consumer of culture, I like those things. And so we wanted to show Canada in all its rough edges and the city in all its rough edges. And that's what we like. And so that's what we wanted to do. And to make something that was really interesting to the viewer and that'll unfold over 8 weeks. We were inspired by things like The Wire. We were inspired by things like, The Bridge coming from, the Killing coming from, Scandinavia. Luther. These are our shows. This is what's in its DNA. And so we wanted to do our spin on it.
And there's a lot of relationships. I think that's one of the things that I love the most in how complicated those relationships are, as those things are in real life. There's an interaction between crime reporters and the police. Why did you want to go down that road?
Well, I'm the relationship girl. As a writer, I find that what interests me in a lot of these crime dramas are the relationships. And so when we were doing research and I discovered something that was probably obvious, but it wasn't to me, that like cops and journalists, that they have a really conflicting relationship, and the fact that they actually use each other, to get information out and to pass information out, but there's a big distrust. And so I'm always looking for, like, what is the most explosive thing that can happen? What is the most conflicting thing that we can put together? So we thought, okay, so our lead, detective is sleeping with this young journalist, and some of the problems that creates, because ultimately, you're looking at a situation where one wants to solve a crime and one wants to get a big story, and it's not always the same, outcome that they're looking for, or even the connective tissue, what they look for, what they seek out, and what are the difficulties around some of that stuff. So that was one of the things that we felt was really, really important. But in addition to Daisy and Lutz's relationship, which is really sexy and interesting, we really wanted to mess with it, throw in a sense of her as our Daisy character, as a young, modern girl, and she has some flaws that you discover as you go along. And those flaws were meant to also make any relationship situation even more complicated or difficult. And then there was also the family relationship, because for us, it wasn't interesting if it was just the work, So because I feel like characters, again, looking for content, creating stuff that feels real. We wanted to have people that have lives. And so we really try to create a rich world around, for example, Daisy with her sister and her father and all these kinds of things, and really build stories that could, that could sort of continue and that could bring an audience in. So, and for me, when we actually started in the story room, because we typically don't do serialized dramas in Canada, we haven't until recently, we really had to actually convince the other writers that we brought in that this was really the way to go. And we had some interesting, wouldn't you say, some interesting interactions, but we really fought for and believed in really developing characters that were sexy, interesting, complex, and there was always a place for you to take the drama.
The character Daisy you brought up, she's the journalist. She's supposed to be the truth seeker. When I was watching, I was wondering, for you, do you still think journalism has a role to play in uncovering the truth, and why?
Oh, absolutely.
Most definitely,
yeah.
because the sad thing about what's happening with media and journalism as a whole, but while people don't want to pay for the news, it's really, really scary. Because you look now, this is going to be a high time for people in business, in politics, who want to pull the wool over people's eyes, pull back regulations, and have like things like the mortgage crisis in 2008. This is going to be like in the future, if this continues unabated, this will be the rule as opposed to the exception, because it's very, very scary, because the amount of legwork and phone calls and going through documents and people pouring through documents and looking for patterns and inconsistencies, that takes real resources, it takes real energy and real money, because people have mortgages and kids with braces and all this stuff to pay for, and people need to be trained to do this work properly. So this is really, really scary.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, like I said earlier, the whole thing about journalism and cops, I have always been fascinated by how journalism has changed the world, how they brought stories and exposed so much of the bad stuff that's under the rocks and hidden in these pretty glass exteriors. And so for me, just, in thinking, because this is our first 1-hour drama series, it was the natural place to go, because I actually think that work is really amazing work, and we don't value it. So we we have we have subscriptions to newspapers and not just magazines, actual newspapers, and it's so important for us, and we're hoping that even just by making a show, maybe journalism will seem sexy again,
Right.
and I actually feel like it's a bit of the zeitgeist right now because
Yeah.
as newspapers are dying, people are really starting to really understand the benefit. And it's not just to tell a story, but it's actually to expose stuff,
Yeah, and investigate. So many
Yeah.
of the investigative
Yes.
bodies in Canada are getting closed down
Yeah.
now in journalism. But you've got characters from that walk of life to street life to the highest levels of government. How do you research to do a show like this? How do you find out what's real in all those places?
Well, research is really important to Sudz and myself. So whenever we start a project, we really want to know everything. So with our Somalian characters, we're really excited actually that we're bringing to Canadian television a window into what it's like as sort of like a new Somalian community. So we actually
A fictionalized version of this. Like,
fictionalized,
this is
right, yeah.
important to say because,
Yeah.
again, like this is not a documentary.
Mm-hmm.
This is not like and how we do our process is we actually go and meet people in every community that we're talking about. So if it's the legal community, we went to the Attorney General's office. We went and
Right.
spoke to lawyers.
Yeah.
If it's the cops, we have a number of cop consultants. If it's the whole political back room, we've got political back room type consultants because we're actually trying to draw characters and actually base them on real people.
Yeah.
In terms of going into the Somali community, again, we went in and spoke to some elders. We went and spoke to some young people, and again, got a diversity of views because it's not like a
Right.
monolithic point of view.
Yes.
And so that's something that's very important to us to portray like a number of people and a number of views because there is no single view. Like when we went into the Caribbean community for, when we're doing like a miniseries called Guns based on gun trafficking and looking at like young Caribbean thugs or whatever, or thugs of Caribbean descent. We wanted to portray human beings. And so that's what we're trying to do and create roles for actors. And again, this is a fictionalized account. These are some amazing performances. And one of the great things and exciting things about this is showing a bunch of actors who are descended from East Africa, the Horn of Africa area, and showing them in Canadian television in the first time, I think, a lot of them. And this is a whole new talent pool. And this is and there's some scintillating performances by like Araya Mengesha, Dalmar Azubayt, Shadi Ali. They're fantastic.
they really are.
I understand when you were researching the Rob Ford thing happened.
Yes.
How did that play in?
Well, so in fact, the story is about our character Hassan. He has there's a phone and there's something on the phone, and if you look at the Rob Ford story, it was all about like someone took some photos of Rob Ford on their phone, and so that's I think that was a jumping off point. But what was fascinating about the Rob Ford story to us wasn't Rob Ford, although it was interesting. It was, in fact,
was
the
fascinating.
fact that there were these young Somali kids that was in a room smoking crack with one of the most powerful political figure in Canada, the mayor of Toronto.
And people couldn't believe
And
it.
people couldn't believe it. And so for me and Sudz, we're like, how did those kids get in that room? And so that was what was interesting to us. And so when we started to really dig and try to figure out what our story was going to be, and because like I said, it's a jumping off point. It's not the Rob Ford story. We talked to a police officer, detective, and he said, what you have to understand is that this happened because as newer immigrants, and I'm a Jamaican immigrant, but as newer immigrants to Canada, the Somali community did not get the memo about organized crime. They did not quite understand.
Like the young thugs, because the young
thugs.
thugs doing this and trying to pull this off,
Yeah.
they didn't understand the established pecking order because there is a sort of a code in this city and how the city is run. Because a city this big with a drug trade that's as big as this city has, there should be much more bodies dropping. But because of the way organized crime runs in a city, there's
It's very
a way,
organized.
there's a system, and it's like, and you don't mess it up. And so when it does, go awry, it's because kids don't understand but it gets correct. There is a corrective. And so there's a whole machination, there's a whole back end to this that we don't even know about. And that's one of the things that our cop colleagues and our criminal colleagues tell us and illuminate, give us, enlighten us, I guess. And so in terms of the research that we do, we're dogged about it. And it's very, very important to Jen and myself about getting it authentic, getting it right. Because in terms of we are dealing with people of Islamic faith in this show. So we needed an imam to give us spiritual guidance, to tell us, okay, well, how person would pray. Oh, what's a funeral funeral rite like? Oh, you're washing the head from left, right to left, always that. And so even we got there's a funeral scene in episode 3, and we had to get the burial cloths, and they came from Egypt. It had to be authentic.
Let's talk about the city, because you just brought that up. A big multicultural city like Toronto, people see it as one big multicultural city, but in fact, it is like a whole bunch of little cities. And I did the intro to you both kind of with my tongue in my cheek, because when I said Toronto is home to people like Drake and Glenn Gould, there's a whole bunch of listeners right now who, when I said Glenn Gould, thought about the white pianist who's very famous in this building. There's a whole bunch of people, in fact, my community all across the country, when I said Glenn Gould, said, oh, she's talking about the Indigenous actor Glenn Gould, who's been in 25 television series and about 10 movies. So we are together but separate in so many ways, depending on your race, your class, your power. Is that something that you felt consciously living here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I came as an immigrant kid, and I remember I was 5 and I had an accent, and people made fun of my accent, and I was like, damn it, I'm gonna lose that darn accent, and I'm gonna sound like everybody else. And then growing up, it's like you are aware that you don't exist in the history of this country, because there was very little that I saw growing up that said, that Black people, never mind Caribbean people, contributed. And so, for example, when we became filmmakers, we did a film called Speakers for the Dead, and it actually was fascinating to us because we found a community in sort of that Owen Sound, Priceville area that showed us that African Americans came and populated southwestern Ontario before, sort of European settlers in many cases. They were some of the first non-native settlers in the area. So I've always had, I think because of my upbringing, and I love Canada, and I love being a resident of Toronto, and but I've always felt that we, in terms of the work we do, that we actually have to push to really broaden the scope of what we understand Canadians to be and the stories that we have. And so that's always been a part of our work. Just even this story, Shoot the Messenger, when we started researching, I thought, yeah, I'm Black. These Somali kids, they're Black. I know all about this. And actually, when we started doing the research, we realized we actually did not know a lot about, the Somalian, North African communities at all. And then I started to see the similarities of, their integration into, Toronto society. Yeah. Not very unlike the Jamaican integration into society, and sort of feeling like you're a bit on the outside of things, yep. And so so those things are really important to us in the storytelling. And, people have made, a lot about the diversity of our show. And, I keep saying it's diverse because the city around us is diverse. Yeah. We're not doing anything like special, like, oh my gosh. No, it is actually the world we live in. And so we think, and I believe that it's actually a part of our responsibility to tell great stories that reflect the people in the society we live in. So,
Lyric Bent plays the detective, one of my favorite characters, because in some ways he is not fitting in the little box society wants him to be in, because he's the cop and not the robber. But here he is in this situation where he's being pulled because of race and class and power. What kind of inspired you with that character?
Well, when we say lyric bent, we always say Detective Handsome.
Yeah, it's true. He is pretty gorgeous, I must say. Even for a gay girl, I gotta tell you. I'm like, yeah.
Hey, I'm straight, and I'm like, he's really handsome. So
Yeah, he
it's
is.
all good.
It's true.
But the thing is that with Lyric and with that character of Lutz, being a black police officer, we hear things like, even in the vice presidential debate earlier, like a black officer shot a black suspect or whatever. The thing is that the idea of implicit bias exists. You're a black cop. You're in that world. And so the idea of being a black cop with those goggles on, with that implicit bias, all that stuff is within you. And so we actually had Scott Wortley, who's a professor of criminology in U of T, was one of our consultants. And his research is pioneering in terms of racial profiling and police bias and all of that. So that was part of our journey. It's really the journey that began this whole thing. And so understanding and talking to him and looking over his research, and he's talked over at Canvas like a zillion, black police officers in general. And so to hear their stories, and that sort of fed into who Lutz is.
Were you guys worried at all about the fact that you just mentioned, Jennifer, that you were showing this group of people kind of for the first time on television? It is in a crime setting. Yeah. There are all kinds of complaints happening right now. People are pushing back at that Mogadishu, Minnesota series that's going to be coming on HBO. Which Somali Canadian musician Kanon's actually one of the creators. How worried were you about portraying a stereotype?
Well, I think that we're always concerned about portraying a stereotype. Again, like looking at this in the context of our work, the history of our work. Our first short film was called My Father's Hands, and that dealt with a father and son at loggerheads. Father's an old school Jamaican immigrant butcher. Son is a new school Canadian dancer, vegetarian. So they're polar opposites.
Right.
The one night they get shot, and they get thrown in the meat locker and left to bleed and freeze to death. That was the first show, and the person who shot that the person who shot the gun was a young black man. That's and a lot of the stuff that we've done has images of young black men in violence. This is something that is kind of like not our bread and butter, but this is one of the stories that we tell, and because we're looking at these human beings who are making these criminal choices. And again, these are choices. And so we're looking at those choices and what's behind those choices and the whole environment around that. So we're trying to portray human beings and not just stereotypes, because these are brothers, sons, lovers, friends, fathers, doing these things. And so we didn't want to do Caribbean, gangsters of Caribbean descent or young men of Caribbean descent yet again. So we were like, you know what, why don't we stay true to the actual story that kind of inspired us, So why don't we do that? And then that actually gives us a chance to work with some young actors who don't get a chance to be on screen that much.
Right.
Don't get a chance to do that
Yeah,
much.
but I want to add that, look, we're interested in urban, gritty television. That's what we watch a lot of. It is something that's interesting to us. But what we actually do, and we work very hard at this, is that we try to create characters that have depth and that are real. They don't walk on and they're caricatures of situations. We give them family, we give them agency. And I actually think that it is, I never want someone to say, you can't make this because it shows, a black person in a bad light.
Let me ask you this. There was a young Canadian filmmaker named Jeff Barnaby who did a beautiful film called Rhymes for Young Ghouls that was all about life on reserves. And in fact, he only would cast people who were on reserves. And he got a whole bunch of backlash for it. Oh, you're showing all these things. And he said in response to that, I will not take part in your pity porn.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask, do you relate to that?
Absolutely. In fact, what I say in Sudz, and I say, we will not let people dictate, including our own people, to us what we can and cannot create. But we have a responsibility when we create it to make it authentic, to have multi-dimensional characters who we understand, that we understand their motivations, and we can feel for them and know why they're doing things. Not people devoid of actual humanity and just do things, or they step in and step out and we have no idea why they're there. So those are the things that we actually make sure that when we create these characters, that we make characters with agency and are powerful or interesting. And if they're bad, they're bad. But there's you're gonna know the reasons around why they are that way. So that to me is where my responsibility lies. But but you're right. It's like when we did our first feature film, it was Love, Sex, and Eating the Bones. It was about a black dude addicted to porn, but it was a love story. And some people were like, "Oh my gosh, you make this feature film and it's a black dude with porn." I'm like, "Hey, it's a funny movie about a character that was really interesting, and it won the best first feature at TIFF."
Amazing. Thank you both so much. Jennifer Holness and Sudz Sutherland, they're the creators of Shoot the Messenger. You will be able to see it on CBC TV starting next Monday.